Good morning. Before we get started, do you remember the last three memory verses? Joshua 1:5. I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Joshua 24:15c. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Ezekiel 36:27. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. As you listen to today's story, Gideon leads Israel, think about these questions. Number 1, who are the Midianites and how did they trouble Israel? Number 2, why did Gideon try to hide from the Midianites when he threshed out his grain? Number 3, how did God tell Gideon that he was chosen to deliver Israel? Number 4, how did Gideon destroy the heathen god his relatives and neighbors had worshipped? Number 5, what two signs proved to Gideon that God had chosen him to drive the Midianites out of the land? And number 6, what was Gideon's response to these two signs? Gideon leads Israel. After 40 years of peace and prosperity under Deborah, the Israelites became careless again. Soon, they forgot how good God had been to them. They made images of the gods the Canaanites worshipped. They even built altars, offered sacrifices, and bowed down to these gods. Again, the Israelites lived like their heathen neighbors. When God saw the Israelites bowing down to other gods, he was displeased. He could not help a people who did not love and serve him. About this time, the Midianites began to make trouble. For many years, they had occupied the land to east of Israel. They lived in tents and moved often in search of good pasture and water for their cattle.
Finally, the Midianites camped along the borders of Israel. Because the Israelites were too weak to drive them away, they grew bolder. At first, they allowed their flocks and herds to graze on the pasture lands of Israel. Then they began to steal the food that grew in Israel's fields and vineyards. They even crowded the Israelites out of their homes. Like grasshoppers, they filled the valley with their tents and ate up everything the Israelites grew. With their homes gone, the Israelites had no place to live. The mountains, dens, and caves were the only places they could find. They were uncomfortable, hungry, and unhappy. In their trouble, the Israelites remembered God and cried again for his help. God knew the people had brought all this trouble on themselves, but he sent a prophet to remind them of all the wonderful things God had done for their fathers.
The prophet told the people, "The Lord God of Israel brought you out of slavery in Egypt and gave you this land. You have disobeyed him. Do not be afraid of the gods your neighbors worship. The Lord, he is God." After the prophet had spoken to the people, they returned to their caves. Gideon decided to thresh some of his wheat and hide it before the Midianites came and took it. As he worked, an angel came and sat down under an oak tree nearby. Gideon was surprised when he looked up from his work and saw the strange visitor. The visitor said, "Gideon, the Lord is with you. You are a mighty man of valor." "But sir," Gideon answered, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this trouble come? Why doesn't he do great things for us as he did for our fathers when he brought them out of Egypt? Why has he forsaken us and let the Midianites oppress us? Go," the angel said, "in all your might. The Lord will save Israel from the Midianites."
How could a man like Gideon save his people from their enemies? He asked the visitors. "I came from a poor family. Of all of my father's sons, I am the least. How could I do such a great work?" "The Lord will be with you," the angel answered, "and you will smite the Midianites." After all the troubles that had come upon the Israelites, Gideon was so discouraged that it was hard for him to believe the words he heard. How could he be sure God would help him? He told the visitor, "Show me a sign that what you say is true. Stay here, I ask you, until I bring you a present and set it before you." And the angel promised to wait. When Gideon had prepared meat, broth, and bread and brought it, the angel said, "Place the meat and the bread on the rock. Then pours out the broth," and Gideon did it. When the angel touched the food with his staff, fire flamed out of the rock and burned up all the food. When Gideon looked around, the visitor was gone.
At once, Gideon knew his visitor had been an angel of the Lord. How afraid he was. God told him, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid." And Gideon built an altar here. He called it, "The Lord is Peace." Now the Israelites worshipped an idol called Baal. Even Gideon's father had a grove of trees for his images of Baal. Here the people worshipped. That night the Lord told Gideon, "Take one of your father's oxen and tear down the altar of Baal. Then cut down all the trees that are around it. In its place, build an altar to the Lord God. Place the wood of the grove on the altar and offer sacrifice to the Lord." While it was still night, Gideon called 10 servants to help. They tore down the altar of Baal, cut down the trees, and built an altar to the true God. On it they sacrificed an ox to the Lord. The next morning, when the people came to worship Baal, they found his altar torn down and the grove gone. They saw the ox on the altar of the Lord. "Who did this?" they asked angrily. Someone answered, "Gideon, the son of Joash." At once the man went to Joash and said, "Bring Gideon out at once. He has torn down the altar to Baal and cut down all the trees in the grove. We will kill him for this." Joash told the man, "If Baal is a god, let him take care of Gideon."
When the people saw that Baal could not harm the man who had destroyed his altar, they ceased to be angry with Gideon. Instead, they felt foolish for having worshipped such a god. Gideon sent messengers throughout the land to call the soldiers of Israel together. As they gathered, Gideon wanted to be sure the Lord would help them drive the Midianites away. At evening, he put a piece of wool on the outdoor floor. Gideon said to God, "If you will help me save Israel, let there be dew on this piece of wool, and let the ground all around it be dry." When morning came, the ground was dry all around, but the fleece was covered with dew. It was so wet that Gideon wrung water out of it. Still, Gideon wondered. Again he prayed, "Do not be angry, O God, but give me another sign that you will be with me. This time, let the fleece be dry and the ground around it be wet." The next morning, when Gideon found the fleece dry and the ground wet, he believed that God would help him. Now, Gideon was ready to lead the Israelite soldiers against the Midianites.
Now let's answer the questions from earlier. Number 1. Who were the Midianites and how did they trouble Israel? They were tent dwellers and they robbed Israel of land and food. Number 2. Why did Gideon try to hide from the Midianites when they threshed out his grain? He knew they would take his grain if they saw him at work. Number 3. How did God tell Gideon that he was chosen to deliver Israel? He sent an angel. Number 4. How did Gideon destroy the heathen god his relatives and neighbors had worshipped? He and 10 servants tore the idol down at night. Number 5. What 2 signs proved to Gideon that God had chosen him to drive the Midianites out of the land? First, Gideon asked for dew on the fleece only, then on the ground, but not on the fleece. And number 6, what was Gideon's response to these 2 signs? He believed God will help him. This week's memory verse is Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10. "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous hand." Think about it. Help is on the way.
One year there was a terrible flood that deluged a small Midwestern town located in a valley between 2 rivers. Both rivers had overflowed their banks, and the rains continued to fall day and night. There was no relief in sight as the town slowly but surely was being flooded. Everyone was evacuated except for one old man who refused to leave his house, which would soon become completely submerged. "I have faith that God will save me," the old man shouted at everyone who implored him to leave and flee to a higher ground. The man believed in the power of prayer, and he trusted that God would somehow save him.
As the water covered the roads, making them impassable for cars, A man in a four-wheel drive truck stopped at the old man's house and banged on the door. "Hurry," he cried out. "Come with me, and I'll drive you to safety. You haven't much time." But the old man continued to pray. He would not leave his house. Within hours, the water had risen several feet, completely flooding his home. The rain continued. The old man climbed up on the kitchen table and continued to pray. As the water was lapping at his heels, a man in a rowboat paddled up to the old man's kitchen window and shouted, "Sir, get in my boat, and I'll take you to safety." "No," the old man shouted back. "God will deliver me from this flood."
The water got deeper, and soon the old man had no choice but to climb up on his roof. The torrential rains persisted. While he was praying, he heard the chop, chop, chop of a helicopter in the sky. He looked up and saw the helicopter hovering over his house. A ladder had been lowered for him to climb. "Go away," yelled the man at the helicopter. "You will blow me off my roof. God is going to save me. You go save someone else." The helicopter couldn't wait forever, so it left the old man on his rooftop, still praying. Eventually, the water engulfed the house, and the old man perished in the flood.
When the old man arrived at the gates of heaven, he asked St. Peter if he could have a talk with God. Peter took him to the throne of grace. "O Lord, I prayed earnestly for the rain to stop and for your deliverance from the flood, but you left me there to drown." "I don't understand." "My child, I heard your prayers. I sent you a four-wheel drive truck, a rowboat, and a helicopter. Why did you send them away?" Application.
God doesn't always answer our prayers in the way we expect, but He does answer. To have faith and trust in God means that we recognize His activity in our circumstances, regardless of how hopeless they seem. In our eyes, things may look like they are getting worse and that God has abandoned us. But God sees the big picture, and we can trust that He will never leave us nor forsake us. He is at work, even when we don't realize it. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. We also need to remember that God works through ordinary people like you and me, just like the rescuers of the story. When we offer help or an act of kindness to someone else, we may very well be an answer to their prayers. Our memory verse: "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Isaiah 41:10.
This concludes today's lesson.